and welcome to another episode of At War, the podcast by the Conflict Law Center. Today, we are very, very happy to have with us Leila Hatoum. Leila Hatoum is a political economist and MENA expert, and she's also the founder of MENA Comms. Thank you so much for joining us.
Anytime, dear.
So I wanted to start off actually by asking you, you were very recently in Pakistan, which is where we met at the Think Fest, and to talk about what's happened in the few days since you've left, because we've had an Iranian strike and then we've had a Pakistani counter-strike. And also Iran has been striking targets in Syria and Iraq and now Pakistan. So starting with Iran's actions, because they're so recent, why do you think that Iran is acting this way now? And how dangerous do you think it is in terms of escalating this conflict in the region?
First of all, it was a pleasure to be in Pakistan. Beautiful country, amazing people. And I found how passionate they are to learn about world's issues, especially the Middle East and the Levant and Palestine. I mean, like, they're very connected to that cause itself. Before I left Pakistan, I was surprised during the festival, like the event itself, where people were saying Iran is the only country that helped Palestine. So they had a kind of admiration towards what Iran is doing to us and to the resistance groups that are fighting the Israeli occupation of that land. However, what I sensed, because I spoke with my Pakistani friends after I had left, and the Iranians actually attacked Pakistani sovereign territories, and I have felt that they have lost that respect to Iran. At the end of the day, Iran attacked the sovereignty of another state. No matter what kind of attacks happens against Iran, be it the Americans behind it or the Israelis, the Iranians have the right to attack the Israelis basically in Tel Aviv, for example, to attack American bases across, but not to attack the sovereignty of its neighbors and other states, thinking that they are just failed states or rogue agents that it can go and attack them anytime. So we saw it carry 3 attacks, one against the sovereignty of Iraq by hitting Kurdistan. It doesn't matter if there's a Mossad base there or not. The second one, basically breaching the sovereignty of Syria by attacking radical groups and terrorist groups on the ground over there. And the third one was the attack on Jaish al-Adl, who is basically based in the Pakistani part of Balochistan, and that's Pakistani sovereign territory. The best way to solve any issues by rogue agents that are attacking your own sovereignty, for example, let's say as Iran, is to go and coordinate with those sovereign states before anything happens. Either those states will take action on their own, inside their own sovereign territories, or basically they will coordinate with Iran in terms of an attack or basically another action, another path of action. Iran failed to do so, and we saw the reaction. It thinks that basically Pakistan, just like Iraq or like Syria, they will not do a reaction. However, Pakistan is not only a sovereign state, but you have to remember it's a nuclear power. It's a world nuclear power. And it's a country that's not a failed state. It is not divided or basically it has an internal civil war like we see in Syria or in Iraq. So basically a reaction from Pakistan would be very severe. I was very surprised that Pakistan rose to the level of showing self-restraint to forbid an escalation and the creation of a new front of basically fighting amid what's happening across the MENA region, Middle East, North Africa, and Southeast Asia, and Central Asia as well. So I actually felt kind of relieved to hear about the ministries of foreign affairs in both countries, Pakistan and Iran, picking up the phone, speaking with each other. And I do believe that the Iranians apologized during that interview, like basically phone call. And I still say Pakistan has the right to retaliate. However, the self-restraint that it showed it's the bigger entity over that matter. It's not going to burn a whole region because of one attack that it can limit, and it's not going to happen again, because I believe the Iranians learned the lesson on this matter.
Yeah, and I think all of us are combined in hoping that this is going to be it in terms of this event, and it's not going to go past this, especially when it comes to relations between the two states. So looking at the MENA region now and moving beyond very, very recent events to events of last week, given the US and the UK have now started bombing Yemen after the Houthis attacking the ships on the Red Sea shipping route, what are the chances, do you think, of that escalating into a regional or even international war?
You do have to understand one thing. The Iranians, we're still talking about Iranians over here. And please do do feel free to cut me off because I tend to just say all the information I have. So if you have other questions, please do ask me. When it comes to Ansarullah Houthis in Yemen, yeah, Ansarullah Houthis in Yemen, they were not attacking all shipping routes across Bab el-Mandab and the Red Sea. They were only attacking Israeli-linked ships, and the ships that were going towards Israeli ports, basically occupied Palestinian ports, to supply Israel with merchandise, with food or whatever it needs. Now, 75% of Israel's basic trade happens through the sea. So this is the disruption that the to the Mediterranean via the Suez Canal. They never stopped those ships. And if you actually look at the GPS maritime trade that happens through Bab el-Mandab, it's still going on normally. It's only ships that are linked to Israel. Now, the Americans rushed to help with the British because they want to control that strategic area. That's one thing. And they want to continue to allow Israel to receive that and basically the merchandise. They attacked Yemen and they drew first blood. The Yemenis never attacked American ships or British ships. I do believe going forward, the Americans and the British will try to speed up expanding that area to just elevate some pressure from the Eastern Mediterranean region and off the back of the Israelis. Because the moment you have another front open, they think, and I believe they are miscalculating that the Houthis will be so involved in fighting the Americans and the British near Bab el-Mandab and that area in Gulf of Aden, rather than focusing on attacking the Israelis. So I do believe there is going to be an escalation going forward area if the Americans continue with the British with their attack against the Yemenis.
And what will the role of the Saudi government be, do you think, in this, in terms of liaising either with the US or the UK and against the Houthis?
I do believe there's going to be an escalation at any point. Otherwise, the Americans wouldn't have attacked Yemen along with the British, and they continued their attacks. It's not only one attack, it's multiple attacks against multiple cities in northern Yemen. So the Yemenis retaliated by attacking an American ship that's sailing across Bab el-Mandab from Gulf of Aden to Bab el-Mandab to the Red Sea. And that means the Americans drew the first blood. They're trying to elevate pressure off the back of the Israelis at one point or another by creating another front. However, they are miscalculating it because, as we heard from multiple resistance leaders across the region, be it from Hezbollah, Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah, Secretary General, basically, and Houthis leader, Sayyid Abdul Malik Houthi, and then basically the Hamas themselves. You have the Islamic resistance in Iraq. They all said we are a unified front. So whatever happens in one front, we all come to the rescue and help. But at the same time, they will continue to be focused on what's happening in Palestine. So they still have the resources to continue the fight with Palestine, even if the Houthis are kind of basically taken by that attack near Bab el-Mandab.
And what do you think the importance will be of Saudi in this, in terms of the US and the UK looking to them, or their role when it comes to the Houthis?
Well, you have to understand, the Saudis had just come out of several years of vicious war with Ansarullah in Yemen. They managed to reach a political dialogue over the past year and a half that ended up with a truce, kind of a truce. So they have a ceasefire at the moment, and they're having political negotiations. The Saudis, I don't believe they want to reignite that front along their borders with northern Yemen. That's one thing. They're going to show that they are a superpower in the region, and they're basically going to try to de-escalate it at one point or another. And we saw the Saudis going to Iran, having meetings with the Iranians, and then coming back. The American media falsely said that the Saudis were carrying an American message to the Iranians. This is not true. The Saudis were never, I've been monitoring them for the past 22 years. You have to understand, the Saudis never acted as a mailbox for anyone. That's one thing. They never eye to eye with the Democrats. The Democrat regime in the US at the moment is not on best terms with the Saudis. So you have to understand, Biden had attacked Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, and then Biden himself had to carry himself over a plane and come to Saudi Arabia to ask for help in the past when it came to oil and energy markets. So at the end of the day, the Saudis don't do the American bidding. They are coordinating with the Iranians. The Iranians coordinate with the Houthis. So at the end of the day, the Saudis don't want to see that escalation along their borders. And if that tension happens, they're going to try and safeguard the country as much as possible.
And I'm wondering then, so if the peace deal between Saudi and Iran becomes stronger, how important do you think China will be then in the Middle East?
Well, it's playing a very interesting role and a very strong role, and it has increased over the past exactly 13 years and a half. They've been trying to enter that market since 2010, 2011. And they succeeded slowly through the UAE, through Saudi Arabia at one point or another, through also you have to Kuwait and Qatar. So and even basically through Iran and Egypt. You have to understand, like, this region is not limited to just the GCC.
Yeah.
The Chinese were the ones who brokered the deal, the peace deal between the Iranians and the Saudis. And we saw it literally survive multiple attacks and multiple basically misinformation campaigns and propaganda. At the same time, both Iran and Saudi Arabia are now part of the BRICS nations, which is basically the new alliance.
Yeah.
It's a new economic alliance versus the older economic alliance that's controlled by the West and the US mainly, US, France, and Britain. So at the end of the day, I do believe that China will continue to have an increased role in the Middle East in an economic aspect. However, under the table, they will continue to have stronger, not only diplomatic, but also military ties. Not only in terms of basically maneuvers and training. We saw they send their ships for maneuvers in the Arabian Sea at one point, but also in terms of selling arms, training, providing equipment. That's going to change going forward. So I do believe that the Chinese role in the Middle East, especially in the GCC, is going to increase going forward. They brokered the peace deal without shedding literally a drop of blood between the Iranians and the Saudis. That deal is going to stick. Right. Because both nations are part of BRICS.
Okay,
and Americans are not happy about it. Americans are not happy about this.
Yeah. And I think it gives Saudi a lot of leveraging power when it comes to the US versus China. Like, which one am I going to go for? Is kind of playing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, you have to understand, this is the fault of the Americans. The Americans kept pushing away their own allies. They attack their allies in their own media. They publish propaganda against their own allies, and they push them into Chinese lap, and then basically they go and nag about it later on. So they're not happy because it's because their policies never worked. You don't mistreat your own ally. It doesn't work that way.
Yeah. I thought it was so great what you were saying, I think, first about how the Republicans come in as cowboys and the Democrats instead, they sow chaos on the ground. And I wanted to ask you about that in the sense of the Abraham Accords, because so Pakistan is a Muslim country, but a non-Arab country. And for us, looking at the Abraham Accords, public opinion here is so staunchly against Israel and any normalizing of ties. So when we saw, like dominoes, every Arab country fall in terms of wanting to normalize those relations with Israel, and then very quickly thereafter, this onslaught on Gaza, which Israel has unleashed. For us, it kind of shows the impotence of the Arab world, even now that they're not able to do something. And so again, that goodwill for Iran comes in because we're seeing them actually stand up for the Palestinians. So how do you think the Arab world, the Muslim world as well, but the Arab world in particular, has failed the Palestinians?
Well, you have to understand one thing. I have a very different view than everybody else when it comes to the Abrahamic Accords. First of all, you cannot sow good political ties based on religion on its own. And even the three heavenly religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, share the same kind of basically roots in this region, kind of. You have to understand one thing. It's not religion that moves things. It's politics and economy. So at the end of the day, you cannot force people to accept taking off the differences when it comes to religious matters to create a political alliance. You have to take off socioeconomic factors and political factors and mend those to actually have a just peace on the ground that people can accept. Nobody cares about what somebody else's religion is or how we can find common grounds in terms of religion if you still have injustice coming on the ground in terms of an occupation that's killing civilians, that's basically sowing sedition across the region as well. They do have operatives across the region. They're trying to sabotage other nations and occupy other nations as well. I mean, at the end of the day, if you look at it, the Abrahamic Accords were just a cover-up for normalizing ties with Israel that continues to occupy Lebanese territories, Syrian territories, Palestinian territories, and they want to push the Palestinians into Sinai, and God forbid in the future that any attack happens, retaliation as a resistance group from Sinai towards occupied Palestinian territories, the Israelis will go and occupy Sinai as well. they do have that dream of greater Israel. Radicals are the ones moving the Israeli government. So for me, I do believe that the Muslim states, they share the same religion, right? But it's not religion that should be moving us, it's humanity. And we recently saw the 57 Islamic states, the OIC, coming together and basically taking action one by one, banning, for example, Israeli ships from docking into their ports, banning Israeli commercial flights from flying over their airspace. At the end of the day, banning also trucks that have merchandise that's set to end up in Israel from crossing their own territories as well. So towards the end, they came together, but I mean, better late than never, but slowly and surely it's happening. When it comes to the Arab world, the 22 Arab states among the Arab League, 2 weeks ago, you have to remember that they came together a week and a half ago. They came together and they said they're going to support South Africa in its litigation against Israel at the ICJ level, the International Court of Justice. And this is a change in the stand from some Arab states. You have to remember, the Arab League took that decision unanimously. That includes Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, and the UAE, who oppose at one point or another or see Hamas as an opponent that they don't feel comfortable with because it's supported by or funded by the Muslim Brotherhood. The Muslim Brotherhood is considered a terrorist organization in the GCC. So when the Saudis or with the Emiratis or the Bahrainis look at the fight that's happening in Gaza between Hamas and, at the end of the day, Israel, the Israeli occupation, they are very careful in terms of how they word their statements. The Saudis came out from day one. They were the first nation to come out and issue a statement condemning the Israeli attacks on Gaza. They actually stopped any third-party negotiations towards normalizing ties with the Israelis since day one. But the international media doesn't cover that. The Saudis also were among the first to send aid to Gaza, which the Gazans, my boots on the ground over there, keep saying that the packages that were sent by the Saudis are magic packages because they have everything they need, not expired food, enough water and medication, where the other states have been sending expired food and medication that they don't need at one point or another. They sent baby feeding bottles to families that don't even have babies at one point. So like they didn't consider everything when they sent those aid. But then again, better get something in than nothing at all, right? So the Arab states are moving. They have united in terms of supporting the Palestinian cause. Whatever the Palestinians now need, they are being supported by the Arab states. And in terms of international level, they are supporting the litigation against Israel. I did not expect it to happen because of that kind of relationship between the Muslim Brotherhood and the GCC states. But it happened. It happened, like they came together to support the Palestinians eventually.
Right. And what do you make of the Saudi statements that they would still consider normalizing ties so long as they agree to Palestinian statehood, which is, of course, a great question. Yeah.
True. I mean, the thing is, you have to understand, the Americans don't publish all the truth or even half truth in their own media. It always comes with literally with the salt and pepper, and it also comes with lots of disinformation, and most of it is propaganda. When Blinken sat down with the Saudis, after the Saudis stopped the negotiations, you have to remember that the Americans were the mediators in this negotiation. The Saudis did not negotiate directly with the Israelis. Blinken asked the Saudis, will you continue or are you still looking forward towards normalizing ties with the Israelis? And the answer was very clear. We will not normalize ties or negotiate to normalize ties with the Israelis until a complete ceasefire happens. That's the first condition. And the second condition is that a Palestinian state, Israel accepts a Palestinian state on the lands of 1967. Now, why did they actually stick to that term? It's because the Saudis were the ones who pushed for the Arab Peace Initiative of 2002, where the Palestinian Authority agreed to a Palestinian state on the lands of 1967. So there will be no peace deal. There will be no normalizing of ties unless a ceasefire happens. That's the first thing. And the second thing, a Palestinian state on the land of 1967. What did the American media publish the next day? The Saudis are looking forward to normalizing ties with the Israelis. They're still looking to normalize. And this was not the answer. They're not looking forward to normalizing ties. And we saw it from the actions. I mean, like the statements that the Saudis issued, the statements that they issued over the past literally 4 months, they issued 3 statements, and there were several also comments by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and other officials that We want a ceasefire. We're working for a ceasefire. There is no just peace on the ground without a ceasefire and the Palestinian state.
And what do you think are the chances of ceasefire right now? Because I really thought that I was listening also to Norman Finkelstein talk about this, and 2006, the Israel-Lebanon war was the only time that Israel actually wanted a ceasefire, because they had not foreseen that Hezbollah would put up such a strong fight. And here, again, in every other war in Gaza, they've tried not to have a ceasefire until they've achieved their aims. So what is the likelihood of that in terms of a settlement, and also the involvement of Hezbollah? Because I guess because Lebanon is so weak right now, Hezbollah has not really done much.
I do prefer Israeli aggression on Lebanon. I was on the ground jumping everything. And I also met with the American officials who came. Condoleezza Rice was here. I spoke with diplomats. Kofi Annan was here as well. And like basically we kind of interviewed him during the press conference. We asked him questions. So Israelis, from the second week of the attack on Lebanon, the aggression on Lebanon back in 2006, they knew that they went into a quicksand. So they asked for a ceasefire.
Right, yeah.
However, this did not materialize because the Americans were pushing them to try new weapons against Lebanon, and they pushed them for another 2 weeks because the whole war was 34 days. Hezbollah stood its ground, and it actually managed to inflict major harm against the Israelis back then. Hamas did the same thing now. The Israelis thought that after putting Gaza under blockade for 16 years, total blockade, nothing would come in or out of Gaza without the approval of the Israelis, including from the sea side. They thought that they have weakened Hamas. Hamas will not be able to get weapons. Hamas will not be able to do anything. Hamas manufacturing literally homemade weapons, homemade missiles from the pipelines that they actually out from. If you look at it, they were also surprised by the action and the resilience of Hamas on the ground, who stood their ground for 4 months, and they're still continuing to send salvo of missiles towards the inside of Houthi, which is basically Tel Aviv and other cities. 19 settlements at one point or another at the same day received 50 missiles coming from North Gaza. The Israelis want a ceasefire. They want to continue with that kind of weapon. And the information that I said literally shortly before they started phase 3 is that the phase 3 for the Israelis would be them targeting and carpet bombing South Gaza from the air. They're not going to continue to sustain losses on the ground in terms of having their soldiers being killed every day by Hamas. Yesterday, we saw 12 Israeli soldiers killed, including one captain, and they don't announce it directly. They announce it later on. And we had dozens of Israeli soldiers injured, not only in central Gaza, but also in North Gaza and southeast Khan Yunis. So the Israelis are trying to phase out their land operation in Gaza, but they will maintain those fights. They will maintain that aggression, and they will only rely on the Air Force. They have the pride of the Israeli occupation forces, basically military. And they're repositioning those troops to the northern front because you have Benny Gantz, one of the ministers, is trying to push for a war with Hezbollah. Now, people say Hezbollah hasn't done much over the past 4 months. Let's see what Hezbollah did, and you tell me if it's too much or not. I'll leave it to you, and I would love to hear your honest answer on this one. For 4 months, you had 1/3 of the Israeli military stationed and dispatched at the northern front along the blue line, which is South Lebanon. So you're taking off pressure from the Palestinian side. You're taking off 1/3 of the Israeli military that should have been dedicated to Gaza, and now it's dedicated to the northern front. You have half of their maritime forces dedicated to the northern front to actually protect the gas fields in the sea. Okay? You have offshore gas fields, we call them. And then you have half of their air force dedicated literally for the northern front. Now imagine all this force just focused on Gaza. Completely different game changer, because Hamas is outnumbered, and Hamas is also, they don't have enough weapons. Hezbollah lost nearly 180 martyrs so far over the past 4 months, killed by the Israelis, murdered by the Israelis. At the same time, Hezbollah's attacks against not only the Israeli military, but also the settlements, the illegal settlements across the blue line, and the second tier of settlements behind the blue line as well, across the northern front, they managed to single-handedly push out over 100,000 settlers, Israeli settlers, from the northern front towards internal Israeli, basically, cities. We're talking about Tel Aviv, Haifa, and other areas, towards Houthi. Over 100,000 displaced Israelis who are now living on the expense of their own government,
Okay.
which is costing the government about $1 billion.
Mhm.
$1 billion so far in 4 months just to board them and feed them. We're not talking about medication. We're not talking about their mental health issues. You have about 300,000 Israelis who are suffering from mental health issues, and they are being literally treated in clinics and hospitals at the expense of the government itself, the Israeli government. So all these financial losses and economic losses, plus the attacks that happened against the Israeli army, and the army sustained over literally 2,000 Israeli soldiers between killed and or injured along the northern front, that tells you a lot. So
Yeah.
tell me if you think that we haven't
Yeah.
done anything, but
And
we have
it's
made that
very,
better.
yeah, it's a very interesting perspective, because when I was saying they haven't really done much, I'm talking about direct involvement. But yeah, these are all of the indirect ways that you can conduct warfare now in a much more kind of.
It's not, Hezbollah is not looking for it. Yeah, I mean, sorry, but Hezbollah is not looking for a direct involvement
Yeah.
in the Palestinian cause. Hezbollah Secretary General has always said Palestine should be liberated by the Palestinians. It's the Palestinians' fight. We are only here to help and try to alleviate some of the pressure from them. If they ask us for help, we will go in. So at the end of the day, Hezbollah now is acting as Lebanese resistance groups because Lebanon was attacked by Israel. Israel continues to occupy Lebanon, so they have the right to retaliate. However, they're not going to fight instead of the Palestinians. Palestinians will fight the fight. When they need help, they will ask Hezbollah. And so far, according to my own resources on the ground from Gaza, from the West Bank, they haven't asked Hezbollah for that help. They haven't. And you remember the resistance group across the region, from Iraq to Syria to Lebanon to Yemen and to Palestine, they're all unified front at the moment. Nasrallah said it. We are all unified, we coordinate. So that means unless they are asked to go in, they will not go in. It's not their main fight. Their main fight is basically to deter the Israelis from continuing to attack Lebanon. At the same time, divert Israel's attention away from Gaza or elevate some of the pressure off of Gaza. And this is what's happening.
And so I really wanted to hear from you, given your experience and working in that region for so long, what do you think is what kind of solution, a political solution, do you foresee as being the best one for the Palestinians, and also what is the most expected one that would see some kind of resolution to this conflict? There's so much
That's a very
one
big
state solution, state solution, like where do you fall on this?
It's a big question, and like even political analysts and the politicians themselves, they can't find an answer to it because things are progressing on the ground rapidly. Some people are fearing that we might be escalating towards a World War III over here. And I said it since the beginning of this fight, since October 7. This will either speed up a two-state solution or a solution that basically sees a one state equal to everybody inside of it, or it's going to see a different Israel afterwards. So we might not see Israel as it is today, smaller or not existing over there, but we will definitely see, if we don't go to a two-state solution, we will definitely go into a World War III scenario. And this is what the Israelis are trying to push for now. They're trying to push the Americans to take part in their war, so the Americans will go and fight instead of the Israelis. The Israelis cannot sustain fighting for this long. They've lost nearly 6,000 soldiers killed, soldiers and or officers. Okay, we're talking about officers, we're talking about colonels, majors, captains. At the same time, we have a whole economy that's literally now going downhill very fast, rapidly. They've lost economic opportunities, finances, trade. If you calculate it all together, it amounts to about 342. Basically, we were calculating it yesterday, 342 to $350 billion. Foreign direct investments pulled out, foreign direct investments that were frozen. You had people pulling out their money and transferring it abroad, outside the country. 1/3 of their economy is now stalled. So that's 1/3 of 488 billion. You have their tourism completely shattered. That actually brings in about $25 to $28 billion to the economy every year. It's not there anymore. You do have, in terms of military spending, it's massive spending on their, like they don't receive everything for free. At the moment, Israel is down in terms of artillery. They don't have 109 and 105 missiles. So they're looking for replacing their iron domes that were destroyed by Hezbollah at one point. Hezbollah destroyed two of their main iron domes that protect the northern front. And each iron dome basically billions of dollars. So go.
Okay. Thank you so much for taking out the time to talk to us. This was such an enlightening discussion for me, and I'm sure for my audience as well.
always a pleasure to speak to my Pakistani friends and you especially, and it's always an honor basically to meet new people.